Are there any bills for introduction? There are no bills for introduction. The House then comes to questions for oral answer, and the first question stands in the name of the Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Mr. Speaker, I seek leave to have this question put down to below question 12 so that the Prime Minister will have a chance to answer it.
Leave is sought to have the question number 1 relocated to below question number 12. Is there any objection to that course of action? There is objection. The Right Honourable Winston Peters.
This question is to the Prime Minister. Has he had time to read and digest the judgment of Justice Miller regarding the Crafar farm deal? If so, does he stand by his comments made in the House yesterday?
The Honourable Jerry Brownlee on behalf of the Prime Minister.
On behalf of the Prime Minister, I have read the judgment and I stand by my comments.
The Right Honourable Winston Peters.
To which law was the Prime Minister referring when he claimed in the House yesterday that the law, and to use his words, does not allow ministers to reverse OIO advice, end of quotes?
The Honourable Jerry Brownlee.
Mr. Speaker, I think what the Prime Minister was referring to was the requirement that all ministers act within the law, and that the expectation that the advice coming from the Office of the Overseas Investment Office would in fact be within the law.
The Right Honourable Winston Peters.
That's worse than yesterday.
Order.
Submit a question.
The Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Why did the Prime Minister yesterday argue that the ministers Jonathan Coleman and Maurice Williamson should rely on the same view as the Overseas Investment Office?
The Honourable Jerry Brownlee.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, the expectation by all ministers is that they should be able to rely on the advice of their officials. Now, in relying on that advice, they come to their own conclusion within the law.
The Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Do the two ministers not have their own officials? And that being the case, what scrutiny, independent of the OIO... Well, I'll say it again very slowly for the so-called learned gentleman down there thinks it's stupid.
Order. Order. I'm on my feet, and that'll be the end of any further interjection. I get to my feet to stop this childish backwards and forwards across the House. I say to the honourable gentleman on my right, such interjections don't exactly help with good order in the House. The Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Speaker, what scrutiny, independent of the Overseas Investment Office, did his ministers apply to the Overseas Investment Office report on the Crafar purchase?
The Honourable Jerry Brownlee.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, I would expect all ministers to exercise their judgment based on the advice that's put in front of them. Mr. Speaker, it's patently obvious that all those decisions are reviewable. That's why we are in this situation now.
Point of order, the Right Honourable Winston Peters. Order, a point of order has been called. The Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Speaker, we're not going to get anywhere if we're going to get that sort of answer. I asked whether there's two ministers concerned got independent advice, independent of the Overseas Investment Office. That's what I want to know.
Well, under the circumstances, I'll allow the Right Honourable Winston Peters to repeat his question as he asked to make sure everyone understands exactly what it is.
What scrutiny, independent of the Overseas Investment Office, did his ministers apply to the Overseas Investment Office report on the Crafar purchase?
The Honourable Jerry Brownlee.
On behalf of the Prime Minister, I doubt that's word for word the first question, Mr. Speaker. However, what I would say again is that on behalf of the Prime Minister, I expect all ministers to exercise their judgment based on the information that is provided to them by their officials. Their officials, in many cases, are not aligned to the OIO.
Point of order first, the Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Speaker, I got the Minister's answer, but the question I asked him, did they receive or did they seek any independent advice of the OIO? Now, that's pretty simple.
The member is correct. His question did exactly ask that. In his answer, the Minister referred to advice from the officials. Now, while he didn't specifically say the ministers received advice from their own independent officials, I picked up that from the Minister's answer, but if I'm wrong there, the Minister had better correct me. It seems that is what the Minister intended. The Honourable David Parker.
Did the legal test always require the benefits from overseas ownership to be substantial and identifiable?
The Honourable Jerry Brownlee.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, what I understand is that is the case, but it was the way in which that conclusion was reached that has been the contention and ultimately the judgment that's come down. So instead of that test, better before or after, it is now with or without. It is a fine technical point. The judge makes that clear, and he has also invited ministers to reconsider on that basis, which they will do.
The Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Why did the Prime Minister ignore Section 17 of the Overseas Investment Act in response to a question in the House yesterday, asking how he arrived at the view that his two ministers, to use his words, had no discretion at all, end of quotes?
The Honourable Drew Bromley.
Mr Speaker, well, the first point is, on behalf of the Prime Minister has no responsibility in this case directly, and he is correct in saying that his ministers were appropriately following advice given to them by their officials, assessed and judged by themselves. The point is, Mr Speaker, that the decision in any event has been reviewed by the courts, and the court has made a recommendation about a reconsideration, and that will take place.
For the Honourable David Parker.
Isn't the reality that the court did what his minister failed to do? It applied the economic benefit test and found no identifiable evidence that the overseas buyer would produce any substantial benefit to New Zealand.
The Honourable Drew Bromley.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, the test applied by the Overseas Investment Office was the same test that they used to advise a former Minister, the Honourable David Parker, in his decisions on these matters. Mr Speaker, the question is, should the test be applied on a before or after basis, or a with or without basis? The court has ordered it is with or without, and invited ministers to reconsider, and that's what they will do.
Dr Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. How were the ministers able to exercise their judgment in this case while at the same time following the Prime Minister's direction that they had no discretion?
The Honourable Drew Bromley.
Mr Speaker, I think the point is that all of these decisions are reviewable, and on the evidence put in front of the ministers, it was patently clear, using the before or after test that has now been decided is inappropriate. They had, Mr Speaker, while it was decided that on the before or after test, asking the questions that are required through the 4 points inside that particular part of the more than 20 points that have to be considered in the test, they exercised their judgment appropriately.
The Right Honourable... Oh, is it a point of order?
No,
supplementary question, the Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Ask the Prime Minister as to why the public should not assume that the two ministers in question took the view that the Prime Minister keeps on defending, that they had no discretion at all and therefore applied no independent thought or judgment at all and just rubber-stamped the Crafar deal.
The Honourable Drew
Speaker,
Bromley.
on behalf of the Prime Minister, the ministers have acted totally appropriately. They were entitled to believe that the advice they got from their officials was consistent with the advice that had been offered over the previous 7 years. A large number of those years where the member himself was supporting the government in those decisions. It was never a problem when he was supporting the government. Apparently it is now.
Point of order, the Right Honourable Winston
Speaker,
Peters.
he cannot go on to a personal attack of me when it's well known that he and others got rid of New Zealand First and Winston Peters because we were stopping their traitorous behaviour.
Order. 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 Now, the Right Honourable Member knows that is not a point of order under any guise whatsoever. It was successful, though, in stopping the Minister's answer. I presume the Minister, therefore, has finished his answer. And he's finished his answer. Dr Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does the Prime Minister have any other concerns about the way the Overseas Investment Office is carrying out its functions, in light of comments this morning from the Director of the OIO that in applying the economic benefit test, they never take any account of the economic downside or economic detriment that might result from foreign investment, such as an increase in the current account deficit?
The Honourable Jerry Brownlee.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, no. They have applied the law appropriately for 7 years. We've got to a point where one small aspect of the tests that were put in place those 7 years ago does need to be reconsidered in a different light. So going from before and after to with or without. And I'd ask, Mr Speaker, why it is that after 7 years of this bill being operative, that suddenly those who were party to passing it are so very concerned about it.
Order. That's sufficient. Question. Further supplementary question, Dr. Russell Norman.
Does the Prime Minister now accept that those of us who have opposed the operation of this system all along, such as the Green Party has been absolutely correct to oppose it because the OIO has been incorrectly applying the test, as Justice Miller pointed out in the judicial review?
The Honourable Jerry Brownlee.
Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, Justice Miller has made that point, and ministers will act within that judgement for any future applications and the reconsideration of this application. Other than that, the Overseas Investment Office have operated inside the bounds that were prescribed in the law by a previous government.
Question number 2, the Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Land Information.